The last thing Darren Hale remembered clearly was the sound of engines. Not the roar of landing, the whine of leaving. He had been lying on his side in a ditch of red clay, bleeding from a cut above his eye, watching the belly of the quiet prophet shrink into a pail dot against the orange sky. Then the clouds swallowed it. Then silence that he did not scream. He did not wave his arms. He just watched until there was nothing left to watch. Darren was a geological surveyor, 34 years old, born in a coastal town that flooded every spring. He had joined the interstellar mining program because it paid well and because he liked rocks more than people. He was not a soldier. He was not brave in any particular way. He was just a man who had been left behind on a planet that the entire Galactic Union had stamped with a single word: uninhabitable. The planet was called Sabath 6. Thick jungle covered most of its surface. The air carried toxic pollen that could shut down a pair of lungs in minutes without filtration. Temperatures dropped 40 degrees between noon and midnight. The soil was acidic. The water was unfiltered poison. The wildlife had claws and armor and no concept of mercy. The Union had quarantined it 200 years ago and never looked back. Darren had come here as part of crew. 5 species, 12 crew members, 1 merchant captain named Rusha. She was Polivi. For arms, gray skin, large black eyes that reflected light like whetstones. She had organized the trip off the books. Sabath 6 had rare mineral crystals buried in its crust, and Rusha wanted them. The plan was simple. Land, dig, leave, sell, get rich. The plan fell apart on the second day that a seismic tremor split the ground beneath the survey site. The jungle shook. Trees the size of buildings cracked and fell. Darren had been half a kilometer from the ship, collecting samples near a ridge, when the ground opened beneath him and dropped him 6 meters into a mudslide. By the time he crawled out, bleeding and dazed, the crew was already boarding. He heard Rusha's voice over the calm 3 words. "We cannot wait." He shouted into his communicator. It was cracked. Static answered that he ran. He ran through mud and falling branches and air that burned his throat. He reached the clearing just in time to see the ship lift off. The landing legs folded inward like the legs of a spider pulling away from a flame. The thrusters scorched the ground black. And then it was gone. Every alien on that crew had made a calculation. The planet was degrading the ship's shielding. Another hour on the surface, and the engines might not restart. One human was not worth that risk. Rusha had put to a quick vote. 11 crew members voted to leave. Only 1 voted to stay. A small Grida mechanic named Fun, who had barely spoken 3 words to Darren during the entire trip. Her vote did not matter. The math was simple: 0.1 life. 12 lives. The ship left. Darren sat on the scorched clearing as the sun moved across the sky. His suit was torn. His helmet was cracked. His emergency kit had been on the ship. He had a broken comm unit, a survey tool, a half-empty water pouch, and nothing else. The jungle watched him. He could feel it. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every click and hum from the canopy above was something alive and something hungry. The air smelled like copper and rotting fruit. His lungs were already starting to itch from the pollen that he thought about giving up. It came and went like a wave. One moment of it, cold and total. Then it passed. He stood up. The first thing he did was tear a strip from his suit lining and press it over his nose and mouth. It was not a proper filter, but it would buy him time. The second thing he did was walk to the edge of the clearing and break a low branch from a tree. It was dense and heavy, good enough for a weapon. Good enough to feel like he had some say in what happened next. The sun set fast. Faster than anything he had seen on any world. One moment the sky was orange, then red, then black. The temperature fell like a stone dropped from a height. His breath turned to mist. His fingers went stiff. He gathered deadwood, dry leaves, bark that peeled away in sheets. He stacked them in a pile in the center of the clearing, away from the trees. Then he pulled the power cell from his broken comm unit. It was small, barely the size of his thumb, but it still held a charge. He cracked it against a rock and touched the exposed wire to the kindling. Fire, it caught slowly, then all at once. Orange light pushed back the darkness. Heat pressed against his face. The jungle sounds changed. Things that had been moving closer stopped. Things that had been clicking went silent. Darren sat beside the fire with his back to a fallen log and his branch across his knees. His ribs ached. His eye was swelling shut. The cut on his head had dried into a hard line of blood. Somewhere above the clouds, the quiet prophet was already making its jump to the nearest trade lane. Rusha was probably counting future profits. The crew was probably trying not to think about the man they had left in the dirt, and no one on that ship believed he would last the night. Darren fed another branch into the fire and watched the sparks rise into the alien sky. It was the first fire lit on Sabath, 6 in the planet's recorded history. He did not know that. He did not care. He only knew one thing, that he was not done yet. Share artifacts download all part 1 aliens abandoned him document. MD story outline aliens abandoned him document MD. 31 days. That was how long it took for Darren Hale to stop counting sunsets and start counting something useful instead. Water sources, safe paths, pollen cycles, kill zones. On day 1, he had been a man waiting to die. On day 31, he was something else entirely. Something the jungle had not expected. The first week had nearly ended him twice. The first time was an insect. Small, bright green, no bigger than his thumbnail. It landed on his wrist while he slept beside his fire on the 3rd night. Its sting punched through his skin like a hot needle. Within minutes, his arms swelled to twice its size. His throat started closing. His vision blurred. He jammed a sharpened stick into the swelling and squeezed out as much venom as he could, then spent the next 6 hours shaking on the ground, soaked in sweat, waiting to find out if he would wake up again. He woke up. He learned to sleep with his sleeves sealed. The second time was water. A flash flood. On the 8th day, he had made camp near a stream at the bottom of a narrow ravine, because the water was the cleanest he had found. He did not know that Sabath 6 had rain cycles that could dump a week's worth of water in 20 minutes. He woke to a sound like a freight train. The wall of water hit his camp and carried everything downstream, him included. He grabbed a root and held on until his shoulders nearly pulled from their sockets. When the water dropped, he was 2 kilometers from where he had started, naked from the waist up, with nothing left but the survey tool still clipped to his belt. He climbed out. He rebuilt. He moved his camp to higher ground. That was the pattern. Nearly die. Learn. Adjust. Nearly die again. Learn faster. By the end of the 2nd week, he had built a crude respirator. He used the filter mesh from his torn suit, tree resin to seal the edges, and a hollowed seed pod as a mouthpiece. It was ugly. It smelled terrible. It worked. The pollen stopped burning his lungs. He found food through trial and error, which on a death world meant trial and vomiting. He tested plants by rubbing them on the inside of his wrist first, then waiting. If no rash appeared, he tasted a small piece. If he did not get sick in 12 hours, he ate more. He found 3 edible species in the 1st month. A tuber that tasted like wet cardboard. A fruit that grew in clusters on low vines and tasted like sour nothing. A fat grub that lived under rotting bark and tasted, to his surprise, almost like shrimp when roasted over a fire. He ate. He survived. That was enough. But Darren did something else during those first 30 days that no one would have expected. He kept working. Not for anyone. Not because someone told him to. He kept working because that was who he was. He was a surveyor. So he surveyed. He collected flat stones from the riverbed and used a metal shard from his broken comm unit to scratch observations into their surface. Water acidity levels. Soil composition. Temperature ranges. Wind patterns. He marked safe zones and danger zones. He documented the creatures he saw, their sizes, their habits, their territories. He stacked the stones against the wall of the shallow cave he had claimed as shelter and added to them every evening by firelight. The IT was pointless. No one would read them. No one was coming. He did it anyway. On day 26, he saw the warden for the first time. He had been following a game trail east, looking for a new water source, when the jungle went silent. Not quiet, silent. Every insect, every bird, every rustling thing in the undergrowth stopped at once. Darren froze. He had learned to read the jungle by now. Silence meant something. Big. It came through the trees like a slow-moving landslide. 6 legs. A body the size of a transport shuttle. Armored plates, covered its back and shoulders in overlapping rows of dark gray bone. Its head was broad and flat, with 4 eyes set deep in ridges of scar tissue. Each foot ended in curved claws that sank into the dirt like anchors. It was the largest living thing Darren had seen on this planet. It moved past him at a distance of maybe 50 meters, and it did not look at him. It did not need to. Everything else had already cleared out of its way. Darren watched it disappear into the deeper jungle. Then he followed it. He tracked it for 3 days. Carefully, always downwind, always a distance. It had a territory near a geothermal vent where hot water bubbled up from the rock, and the ground stayed warm even at night. No other predator came near. The warden owned that ground completely. On the 3rd day of watching, Darren noticed something. The creature limped. Its rear left leg moved differently from the others. Shorter steps, a slight drag. When it rested near the vent, it kept that leg tucked beneath its body, away from the ground. Something was wrong with it. Any sane person in the galaxy would have stayed away. Any Polivi, any Grida, any Telluri would have marked the territory on a map and walked the other direction. That was the logical thing to do. The safe thing. Darren was not feeling logical. He was feeling curious. He made a decision that night, sitting by his fire, chewing on a roasted grub and staring at the glow of the geothermal vent in the distance, that he was going to get closer. 9 days. 9 mornings of walking into a predator's territory with a flat rock balanced on his palms and a piece of cooked meat sitting on top of it. 9 mornings of sitting down on the warm ground 30 meters from a creature that could split him in half with one swipe and doing absolutely nothing. Darren Hale was not a patient man by nature. He rushed through meals. He walked too fast on trails. He once rewired a drill rig in half the recommended time because the manual bored him. But here on Sabath 6, sitting across from the largest predator on the planet, he had found a kind of patience he did not know he owned. The warden watched him every time. 4 deep-set eyes tracking his every movement from the moment he appeared at the edge of the clearing until the moment he left. It never charged. It never retreated. It just watched. And Darren watched it back, that he brought the same offering each morning. Meat from a smaller animal he had learned to trap using vine snares. Cooked over a fire, because raw meat spoiled fast in the heat, and because Darren had noticed the warden seemed to react to the smell of smoke with curiosity rather than fear. He placed a rock on the ground in front of him, then sat with his hands open on his knees and waited. For 8 days the warden ignored the food. On the 9th day, it sniffed the air longer than usual. Its massive head swung low, nostrils flaring. Darren did not move. The creature took 1 step forward, then another. The ground trembled slightly under its weight. It stopped 5 meters from the rock, looked directly at Darren with all 4 eyes, and then lowered its head and ate. Darren let out a slow breath. Progress. By day 12, the warden ate from the rock every morning. By day 16, it no longer tensed when Darren moved closer. By day 20, Darren was sitting 10 meters away, close enough to see every scar on its armored hide, close enough to hear the low rumble it made when it breathed, and close enough to see the wound, the rear left leg. He had seen the limb from a distance, but up close it was worse than he had thought. The joint was swollen to nearly double its normal size. The armored plates around it had cracked and separated, revealing raw skin underneath that was dark and inflamed. Something was embedded deep in the tissue. A hard edge of metal caught the light when the warden shifted its weight. Darren recognized it. A survey stake, the kind used by geological teams to mark dig sites. Standard Galactic issue. Someone had been here before, years or maybe decades ago, and had left equipment behind. The warden must have stepped on it or been struck by it, and the metal had worked its way into the joint over time. That IT was infected. Badly. The creature was in constant pain. That was why it stayed near the geothermal vent. The heat soothed the swelling. That was why it limped. That was why, despite being the most powerful thing on the planet, it had not wandered beyond this small territory in what was probably a very long time. Darren knew what he had to do. He also knew it might kill him, that he spent 3 days preparing. He fashioned a blade from his suit's broken antenna. Long, thin, strong enough to cut. He heated it in the fire until it glowed, then let it cool and sharpened it against a river stone. He boiled strips of vine in water to make crude bandage material. He practiced the motion in his head over and over. Cut around the metal. Lever it out. Pack the wound. Move fast that on the morning of day 23, he approached the warden with no food, just the blade and the bandages. The creature looked at him differently. It could sense something had changed. Its body stiffened. A low growl rolled from its chest like distant thunder. Darren knelt beside the injured leg. Slowly, his hands were shaking, but his breathing was steady. He touched the swollen skin. The warden flinched. The growl deepened. He cut. The reaction was instant. The warden roared and swung its foreleg sideways. A claw the size of a dinner plate caught Darren across the ribs and sent him tumbling 3 meters across the dirt. Pain exploded through his side. Blood soaked through his shirt. He gasped, rolled, and got back on his knees. The metal shard was still in the wound. He was not done. He crawled back. The warden was thrashing, confused, furious. Darren grabbed the exposed edge of the survey stake and pulled. It resisted. He braced his foot against the creature's leg and pulled harder. The metal slid free with a wet, grinding sound. Dark fluid poured from the wound. The warden screamed. Not a roar, a scream. High and sharp and full of something that sounded too close to relief. Darren packed the wound with boiled vine strips and pressed them down with both hands. Blood ran down his arms. His own blood mixed with the creature's. His ribs burned. His vision blurred at the edges. He held on. Minutes passed. The warden stopped thrashing. Its breathing slowed. It lowered its massive head to the ground and lay still. One eye, the closest one, stayed fixed on Darren. It did not blink. Darren sat back, clutching his side, breathing in shallow pulls. The gash across his ribs was deep, but not fatal. The warden's wound was open but clean for the first time in years. From that day forward, the warden did not leave his side. And far away, aboard a trade station at the edge of map space, a small Grida mechanic named Finn heard a rumor that would change everything. A smuggler's long-range scanner had picked up a heat signature on Sabath 6. A campfire, burning where nothing should be alive. Funn's hands started shaking. She knew exactly who it was. The bar on Outpost, Leha, smelled like engine coolant and bad decisions. Finn sat in the back corner, her 4 thin legs folded beneath her on a stool built for species twice her size. A drink she had not touched sat in front of her. Across the table, a retired Galactic Union Ranger named Poole watched her with the slow, careful patience of someone who had heard a lot of bad ideas in his life and was about to hear another one. Fun was Grida. Small, insectoid, with a hard carapace the color of dull copper and large compound eyes that reflected the dim bar light in 100 tiny fragments. She had been a mechanic on the Quiet Prophet. She had fixed the engines, sealed the hull breaches, kept the water recyclers running. She had done her job quietly and well, and she had never caused trouble until now. "I need someone to fly me to a quarantined world," she said. Poole did not laugh. That was the first sign he was different from the others she had asked. He was Telluri, broad-shouldered, stone-colored skin, a face that looked like it had been carved from a cliff by someone who got tired halfway through. He had been a Union Ranger for 20 years before he retired. He knew what quarantine zones meant. "Which world?" he said. "Sabath 6. He did not blink. He just picked up his drink, took a long sip, and put it down again. "That is a Class 4 death world. The Union put automated defense satellites around it. Anything that enters the zone without clearance gets turned into dust." "I know. So you want me to fly past military-grade orbital defenses to land on a planet that kills everything that touches it?" "Yes." "Why?" Fun reached into the pouch on her belt and pulled out a data chip. She slid it across the table. Poole picked it up and plugged it into a small reader on his wrist. The screen lit up. A scanner readout. Long range, low resolution, but clear enough. A heat signature on the surface of Sabath 6. Regular. Consistent. Burning in the same location over several scans taken weeks apart. A campfire. Poole stared at the readout for a long time. "How did you get this?" "Bought it from a smuggler who runs scans near quarantine zones looking for salvage opportunities. He thought it was a geological anomaly." a vent, or a gas pocket. But vents do not move. This signature shifts a few meters every few days. Someone is maintaining it. Someone is alive down there. Poole looked at her. Who? Infant told him. She told him about the quiet prophet, about the illegal mining run, about the seismic event and the vote, and the ship lifting off while a man lay bleeding in a ditch below. She told him about her vote, the only vote that said stay. She told him about the months since, the nightmares, the guilt that sat on her chest like a stone every morning when she woke up and remembered that she had let it happen. Poole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his thick arms. He is human, Poole said. Not a question. Yes, humans are soft. No automat. No venom. Short lives. Fragile bones. Every biological database in the Union lists them as one of the least physically capable sentient species in the catalog. He paused. And you think one of them survived alone on a Class 4 death world for months. Finn pointed at the data chip. The fire is still burning. Poole said nothing for a long time. Then he finished his drink, stood up, and said, My shuttle is in Bay 19. We leave in an hour. Finn almost collapsed with relief. She had asked 11 pilots before Poole. All of them had said no. Most of them had laughed. 2 had reported her to station security. But Poole did not laugh, and he did not report her. He simply believed the data and made a decision. What Finn did not know was that she and Poole were not the only ones who had heard the rumor. Russia had heard it too. The Polibi captain had kept the quiet prophet moving after Sabath 6. She had sold the crystal samples they managed to collect before the evacuation. She had paid her crew and scattered them across different stations to keep them quiet. She had buried the records of the trip. She had done everything right. But rumors travel faster than ships. When word reached her that a smuggler was selling scanner data, showing a heat signature on a quarantined world she had visited months ago, Russia did not feel guilt. She felt fear. If Darren Hale was alive, he was a witness. He knew about the illegal mining operation. He knew she had authorized a vote to abandon a crew member on a death world. If he ever got off that planet and talked to the wrong people, Russia would spend the rest of her life in a Union prison. She could not allow that. Russia made 3 calls. The first was to a data broker who erased the smuggler's original scan files. The second was to a contact in the Union Patrol Network who confirmed no rescue missions were planned for Sabath 6. The third was to a crew of mercenaries who specialized in problems that needed to disappear. Point 2 ships were now heading for Sabath 6. One carried a small Grida mechanic who could not live with what she had allowed. The other carried 3 armed professionals who had been paid to make sure no one ever left that planet alive. And on the surface below, Darren Hale sat beside a fire with a 6-legged giant resting at his back, scratching observations into stone and listening to the jungle breathe. He had no idea any of them were coming. Poole had flown through asteroid fields, radiation belts, and 1 actual war zone during his 20 years as a Union Ranger. None of that prepared him for what he saw when his shuttle broke through the cloud cover of Sabath 6 at a clearing, cut by hand from dense jungle. Rough but deliberate. At its center stood a structure made of stacked stone and timber, with a roof of layered bark angled to shed rain. Smoke rose from a chimney built of river rock and packed clay. Around the structure, in widening rings, were plots of turned earth where plants grew in neat rows. Paths of flattened dirt led outward in 4 directions into the jungle like the spokes of a wheel. Near the tree line, flat stones were stacked into columns, dozens of them, each one covered in scratched markings. Finn pressed her face against the viewport. Her compound eyes reflected the scene below in 100 tiny copies. She could not speak. Poole landed the shuttle at the far edge of the clearing. The engines cooled. The jungle noise pressed in from all sides. He drew his sidearm and stepped out first. The air was thick and warm, and it smelled like soil and smoke and something alive. Finn followed. She stood on alien ground and called out the only word that mattered. Darren. Nothing moved. The jungle watched. The smoke drifted. Then he came out of the trees. He did not look like the man she remembered. The Darren Hale who had boarded the quiet prophet months ago had been clean-shaven, soft-handed, and a little overweight from too many station meals. The man who stepped into the clearing now was lean to the bone. His skin was dark from sun and wind. His arms and hand were mapped with scars. He wore clothing stitched from animal hides and plant fiber, and his boots were wrapped in layers of vine cord. His hair had grown past his shoulders and was tied back with a strip of leather. He carried a spear. The tip was made of crystal, one of the mineral samples he had been sent to collect. He had shaped it into a blade. He looked at Fun. He looked at Pool. His expression did not change. Then the jungle behind him moved. The warden rose from the undergrowth like a piece of the earth itself waking up. 6 legs unfolded. Armored plates shifted and clicked into place. Its head swung toward the 2 newcomers, and 4 ancient eyes locked onto them with the cold focus of a predator deciding whether something was food or not. Pool raised his weapon. Darren raised his hand. One word. Mine. The warden stopped. It looked at Darren. Then it lowered its head and settled into the dirt behind him like a mountain that had decided to sit down. Pool slowly lowered his sidearm. His hand was shaking. Not from fear exactly, from the realization that he was looking at something no species in the galactic record had ever done. A human had tamed a Class 4 apex predator through nothing but patience and kindness. No technology, no distrance, no genetic modification, just time and trust. Fun walked toward Darren. Her legs felt weak. She stopped 2 meters from him and looked up into his face. I voted to stay, she said. Her voice cracked. I told them we should not leave you. I told Rusha. She would not listen. No one would listen. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Darren looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once. Slow and steady. I know, he said. His voice was rough. Underused. You were the only one. He turned and walked toward his shelter. Fun and Pool followed. What they saw inside made Pool stop breathing. The shelter was small but organized. Tools hung from pegs on the walls. Dried food was stored in sealed containers made from hollowed gourds. A fire pit in the center vented through the stone chimney. But what filled most of the space were the tablets. Flat stones, hundreds of them, stacked against every wall. Each one covered in tiny, precise markings. Data, observations, maps, species catalogs, weather patterns, water chemistry, soil analysis, geological surveys more detailed than anything the Union had ever produced from orbital scans. Poole picked up one of the stones and held it close to his face. His translator implants struggled with the human script, but the diagrams were universal. Temperature curves, mineral compositions, migration patterns of local wildlife, marked with dates and directions. This is more data than the Union collected in 200 years of remote observation, Poole said quietly. He looked at Darren. You did all of this alone. Darren shrugged. I'm a surveyor. I survey. Fun was crying. Grida did not cry the way humans did. Not theirs. Her carapace vibrated at a high frequency that made a thin, keening sound. She stood in the corner of the shelter and shook. Poole set the stone down carefully. He turned to Darren. We came to take you home. Before Darren could answer, a sound cut through the jungle. High and sharp. Not an animal. Not thunder. An engine. Coming fast. Darren moved to the doorway and looked up. Through a gap in the canopy, he saw it. A dark shape descending through the clouds. A drop pod. Military grade. Coming down hard and fast toward the clearing. Behind him, the warden raised its head and growled. Darren did not look surprised. He did not look afraid. He looked at the drop pod the way a man looks at rain when he has already built a roof. That is not a rescue ship, he said. Poole checked his scanner. 3 life signs aboard. Armed. Darren picked up his spear. Get back to your shuttle. Stay inside. Lock the doors. What are you going to do? Finn asked. Darren looked at the jungle around him. His jungle. His ground. Show them whose planet this is. The 3 mercenaries stepped out of the drop pod like they owned the ground they walked on. They wore sealed tactical armor. They carried pulse rifles designed to punch through ship hulls. Their helmet visors glowed a faint blue in the dim jungle light. They moved in formation, covering angles, sweeping the tree line. They were professionals. They had killed on a dozen worlds and had never once failed a contract. They had never been to a death world. Darren watched them from 60 meters away, crouched behind a fallen tree that had been rotting on the jungle floor long before he arrived. He was still. His breathing was slow. The jungle was doing the same thing it always did when it sensed something dangerous. It was going quiet. He did not plan to fight them. He did not need to. He had something better than weapons, that he had home advantage. The first mercenary went down in the pollen belt. Darren had mapped the pollen cycles in his second week on Sabath 6. Every 72 hours, a species of tall fungal growth near the northern ridge released a cloud of fine yellow spores into the air. The cloud was invisible in low light. It settled into hollows and ravines and lingered for hours. Without filtration, one deep breath would swell a pair of lungs shut in under a minute. He led them north. Not directly. He moved through the jungle just fast enough to be seen, just slow enough to be followed. He left tracks, broken branches, footprints in soft mud. He made it easy. The mercenaries followed because that was what they were trained to do. Track, close distance, eliminate. The first one walked into the pollen belt without even knowing it was there. His sealed armor should have protected him, but Darren had noticed something during his months on the planet. The spores were corrosive. They ate through synthetic seals over time. By the time the mercenary realized his helmet filter was compromised, the spores were already in his lungs. He dropped to his knees, choking, clawing at his visor. His squad mates pulled him back, but the damage was done. One down, 0.2 left. The second mercenary fell into a sinkhole. Darren knew every soft spot in the ground within a kilometer of his camp. The jungle soil around the geothermal zone was unstable. Underground streams carved pockets beneath the surface that looked solid but collapsed under weight. Darren had lost a boot to one in his first month. He learned to read the signs. Darker soil, slight depression, a faint warmth rising from below. He led the remaining two along a ridge trail that ran just above one of the largest pockets. He walked the edge. He knew where to step. They did not. The second mercenary was heavier than the first. His armored boots punched through the crust, and the ground swallowed him up to his chest. He screamed. His partner tried to pull him out. The ground kept crumbling. By the time the third mercenary gave up and moved on alone, the second was buried to his shoulders and sinking 0.1 left. The last mercenary was smarter than the other two. He stopped chasing. He found a clearing, put his back against a rock, and waited. His rifle swept the tree line in slow arcs. His breathing was controlled. He spoke in his calm, but Rusha did not answer. He was alone. Darren stepped out of the jungle on the far side of the clearing. No weapon. Hands empty. He stood in the open and looked at the mercenary the way he might look at a storm rolling in. With respect, without fear, the mercenary raised his rifle. The warden dropped from above. It had been moving through the canopy. Silent, despite its size. Darren had learned that about it in the first weeks. For something so massive, it could move through the trees without making a sound when it wanted to. It landed between Darren and the mercenary with a crash that shook the ground. Its armored head swung low. A roar ripped through the clearing so deep that it vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. The mercenary fired. The pulse round hit the warden's chest plate and bounced off like a coin thrown at a wall. The creature did not even flinch. It took one step forward. The mercenary ran. He did not get far. The jungle did not let people run. Not people who did not know in orbit. Rusha watched the three signals on her display go dark one by one. She stared at the blank screen for 10 seconds. Then she reached for the navigation controls to plot a jump. The console beeped. Incoming transmission. Union Patrol frequency. Poole had used his old Ranger codes. While Darren led the mercenaries into the jungle, Poole had transmitted everything. Rusha's identity, the illegal mining operation, the abandonment, the coordinates, all of it sent directly to the nearest Union Patrol vessel on a priority channel. Rusha's ship was locked in a tractor beam within the hour. On the surface, the jungle settled. Night came. The temperature dropped. The fire in Darren's chimney sent smoke curling into the dark sky. Finn found him sitting on a stone outside his shelter, cleaning the crystal tip of his spear by firelight. The warden lay behind him, breathing slow and deep. She sat beside him. Poole stood nearby, leaning against the shuttle, looking up at the stars. "You can leave now," Finn said. "We could take you back. To a station. To Earth. Anywhere." Darren looked at the fire. He looked at the warden. He looked at the stacked stone tablets lining the walls of the shelter he had built with his own 2 hands. He looked at the jungle that had tried to kill him every single day and had failed every single time. "I am home," he said 6 months later. The Galactic Union lifted the quarantine on Sabath 6 and entered a new classification into the planetary registry. Inhabited. Population 1. Species. Human. A footnote was added at the bottom. It would be studied, debated, and feared for centuries. Death world origin species do not merely survive. They settle.